Well, as we've been reporting today, coronavirus deaths in China have dramatically risen as the disease spreads to at least 48,000 people. Here at home, we're all very interested, of course, as to what this means for not only the global economy, but closer to home, the local economy, and how it compares to previous crises like SARS. Joining us live now is Tim Harcourt. He's better known as the airport economist from the University of New South Wales in Sydney. Tim, appreciate your time. Thank you. We are awaiting a decision today by the National Security Committee of Cabinet as to whether or not the China travel ban will be extended. Here at Sky News, we understand that it will be, and that it will be extended for another 14 days. Is that your expectation, and what impact will that have on the Australian economy?
Well, they're taking a very cautious approach. I think the view of the Australian government and indeed world authorities is that almost fear of coronavirus is more important than coronavirus itself, in the sense that you don't want a mass panic to spook financial markets, to spook decision makers and cause havoc. So they're playing it very safe with important measures, with evacuations from Wuhan. And China itself, of course, has Wuhan, a city of 11 million people. A third of the workers have gone home, and it's in lockdown. So I think the idea is that you take a lot of short-term pain in terms of impact on tourism and education and aquaculture, to ensure that you don't do any long-term damage to the Australian economy and indeed globally.
Well, that's the problem, isn't it? We just don't know how long-term this crisis will be. So far, what impact has there been on China's economy? Because obviously that's going to flow on right around the world.
Well, that's right, Ash. I mean, Wuhan is the Chicago of the East. You know, it's very big in terms of electronics, in terms of steel, in terms of Apple iPhones, the automotive sector. So it's a very important economy. It's got a third of its workers home. There's steel production still going on, so Australian iron ore and coal exports will still be going to China, but that's very significant for China. For us, I mean, the obvious impacts have been international tourism, with people not being able to travel. International students, of course, China is our #1 source of international students, and a lot of students have had to stay in China, not start the new university year, and universities are basically using online teaching and resources and research to keep those students going. And lastly, in agriculture, Chinese New Year, very important for Australian seafood exports. They're starting to be impacted. Some, quite important seafood restaurants, Chinese restaurants in Melbourne have had impacts. So that's something to watch very carefully, even though most of our rocks and crops, most of our iron ore, most of our agriculture will still be going to China to keep moving the Chinese industrial engine, which it will continue to do.
How does it compare to SARS, Tim, and what lessons can we learn from the way the economy reacted during the SARS crisis and then the bounce afterwards?
Well, Ash, SARS was short-lived. I mean, it was in the early stages. People were quite worried, and it ended up petering out towards the end of the year, and exporters and other businesses kept going with electronic communication, video conferencing and so on. I think the big difference, Ash, is that when SARS was on, China was 4% of the world economy. It's now closer to 16–18% of the world economy. So coronavirus seems to be more serious from what we know from the recent reports from Wuhan and from China, but also the Chinese economy is more important. There's more global supply chains that depend on China. So that's why we're taking it more seriously than say, SARS in the past.
Here at home, there seems to be an understanding that we shouldn't now expect the promised surplus from the Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg. Is that the right call? Does that matter? I mean, politics aside, that's uncomfortable for the government to have to deal with. But in terms of a budget surplus, do you think we can kiss that goodbye?
We can. What an opportunity for the government to wiggle out of a silly, commitment to make to surplus no matter what. They've got the bushfires, very awful, catastrophic events. The bushfires are now coronavirus. Perfect alibi to get out of a pledge that they shouldn't have made in the first place. And I'd say that previously to Wayne Swan when he was Treasurer. Governments basically have to govern for full employment and growth. Getting a surplus it's a means to an end. It's not an end in itself. So what a get out of jail card for Josh Frydenberg. I'd grab at him with both hands if I was the Treasurer.
I'm sure he'll be listening to your advice, Tim Harcourt, the airport economist. Appreciate you joining us with your insights. And yeah, look, we'll be watching very closely throughout the day as we hear more about the government's plan to extend that travel ban. Tim Harcourt, thank you.